Alrighty. Well, we are right at the time, so I think we're going to get started. We have a bunch of people tuned in here on Zoom. I don't know if you guys knew that I think I sent an email that I was going to send this out more broadly. So we have 4 of you guys here in person, and then there's a whole bunch of you guys online. I was going to have you guys say where you're from and all that, but it gets so confusing knowing who's supposed to talk when. It's good to have you here. You're welcome to chime in for questions and things like that. But we're going to go ahead and get started today. If you don't have them in front of you right now, I would recommend looking at the email that I sent out, or if you guys have these handouts in front of you. I have a handout for today that is front and back. That's basically the material we're going to cover today. And also, as I said in the email, and as you guys have in front of you, we have this booklet from Shawnee. Ron Patterson put together this booklet, and it's divided into 3 lessons. We are not going to follow the lessons that Ron put together, but he has lots of good information and good exercises and things in there, diagrams. So in the handout, anytime I say to look at the Shawnee booklet, that's a reference to this course in Psalm precenting. Lots of good information there. Ron has done a good job of training presenters in Shawnee. When I was in Manhattan for a while, we had a ton of presenters because they all came from Shawnee. Because they were all K-State students and they'd all trained at Shawnee. So that's the impact that some of you can have. If you guys really latch onto this, it's something you end up loving. And you can start training up other people, and it can have an impact all around the church. So anyway, we're going to get started on psalm singing and presenting here. And want to just start off thinking about singing in general. Before we get to presenting in particular, leading the psalms and waving your arm and giving the pitch and things like that, I want to think a little bit about the fact that we do sing in worship. And all of you here in person grew up in the church, and so it's not that strange to you that we sing. But for a lot of people who come in from outside of the church, they may not have much experience singing. It may seem odd that this is something that we do in worship, and why not do other art forms? But why do we put so much emphasis on singing instead of painting or dancing or sculpting or you name it, right? I mean, there's all kinds of other art forms that we don't do in worship. And the reason is that God has told us to sing, right? Can you guys think of any passages where God commands us to sing? Yes. So psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Colossians 3:16. It's there on your sheet. It's the second reference. I didn't even look at that. There you go. No, I know you weren't cheating, Susan. It says, "Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God." So we've been commanded by God to sing, right? Ephesians 5:19, the parallel passage, addressing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody to the Lord with your heart. And then in James 5:13, "Is anyone among you suffering? Let him pray. Is anyone cheerful? Let him sing praise." So when you think about leading the singing, you're helping God's people obey this command from God. And it's something that takes some skill, that takes some practice. You have to put in some work to help other people not have to think about it as much, maybe. And there are ways in which if you become a presenter, you end up serving people in a way, this way, where you have to put in some work and some extra thought and some extra training, but it's to facilitate the people of God obeying this command. And so as you're encouraging other people who aren't maybe used to singing, I know several of you sing in choirs and are used to singing and things like that, but other people feel really like a fish out of water singing. And when that's the case, encourage them that this is something God's commanded us to do, something we all have to work at, and we all have to work on doing well. And before we get into some of the things that we're doing today about music and notes and things like that, I want to remind you that the musical perfection of what you sing really isn't the most important thing. Singing from the heart, singing the proper emotion of the psalm, and singing those words and believing them is so much more important than just getting the notes right. And so whether you end up becoming proficient in this, in presenting and leading the singing or not, sing from the heart and sing the words first and foremost. But it's interesting to think about the fact that our praise is called is the fruit of our lips. It's a sacrifice of praise. And when you think about the Old Testament sacrifices, what are some of the what did they have to bring? What kinds of sacrifices did they have to bring? What kinds of animals did they bring in sacrifices? What do you say? Clean ones, right? They couldn't be unclean animals, right? They had to bring good animals in that sense, clean animals that they could have eaten, right? And also they had to be unblemished, right? They couldn't be the sick and the lame and all those things. And so if you think about our praise, if we have the ability, even some ability, to sing well and to bring a better sacrifice of praise in that sense, we should want to make it better. We should want to make it sound better. We should want to offer the best possible sacrifice of praise and make it beautiful for God. So that's all just some background here, is just some encouragement to you to think about singing, to think about leading the congregation well in singing and helping people obey this command from God well. So today we're going to go over just a few basics of singing and a few basics on notes on the page. And before we get into notes, you'll see there I have a little bit of a little section on the speaking range and singing range. This is one of my hobby horses. I had an article about psalm singing where I mentioned this. But most people don't know that your speaking range, where you normally speak, the tone of the note that your voice is singing, in a sense, while you're speaking, is actually near the bottom of your range. So you have a funny looking graph on your sheet there. And that weird sort of ovally shaped squiggly thing is your whole range. So if you see on the bottom, there are notes on the piano, and to the left is lower and to the right is higher. And that big blobby oval thing is your whole range of notes that you can sing. This is an actual scan of someone's voice. And so it covers this big wide span. It's a couple of octaves on the piano. If you don't know what an octave is, that's okay. It's a big wide range, but then those little tiny circles on the left side with the little plus signs in them, those little circles are speaking samples, I think, if I understand this correctly. And so all the speaking they were doing is way down in the bottom of your range. So when I'm talking all the time, my voice hovers around like an A, low A, a B, B flat, somewhere in that range. But that's almost the bottom of my range. I can't really sing much lower than a G on the piano. But I can sing a lot higher than that. And so the point of this is singing, if you're not familiar with singing, it's going to feel higher than it's supposed to. So a lot of people today will say, I can't sing because all the tunes are too high. And you're going to deal with this if you're leading the singing. You're going to deal with people in the congregation kind of singing quietly, and men in particular singing too low, singing at an octave lower than they're supposed to, because they think that's where they're supposed to sing, because they're not used to their voice, not used to using the top 2/3 of their range. And it's not just true for men. This is true for women as well, for girls as well. And we're not used to using that whole top 2/3 of our range. And so you have to get used to singing more than just the notes that you're used to speaking, if that makes sense. And that takes some getting used to. So that's just some encouragement to you. If you've ever had that thought that it's too high, or if you're trying to help people in your congregation sing and they tell you it's too high, try to talk them through this and help them understand that your voice is going to feel weird when you sing, in a sense.
Well, and I discovered too, like, my mom, one of her main complaints is, well, I've gotten older, I can't sing as high.
Right.
So then, stand behind Andrea or one of the Gilmore girls and learn alto.
Right.
And she did. She at her other church, when she was singing in the church choir, she sang alto, and occasionally she'll try and do it, and I'll stand next to her and kind of sing it louder, so she couldn't figure the part out. But that's what she said. Well, when I got older, I lost my range, and it's like, I don't know if there's truth in that, but maybe. I mean, we all age, but I don't know if our range changes or not.
I have heard that your voice lowers over time. I don't know if anybody has more expertise than me on that and can weigh in on that, but I think your weight range does get lower as you age. And actually, there's been a shift society-wide that our ranges are a little bit lower than they used to be, and we're not sure why all that's happening. if you noticed in the Blue Psalter, we made that transition, they started pitching tunes a little bit lower. That's partly because of that. But for those of us who have no low range like me, that has been kind of a struggle. So, but yes, you gotta learn what your range is and get comfortable with the fact that you can sing probably a lot more notes than you maybe think. Yes, I mean.
I had a music teacher that she said that I don't know, but she said that at one point you can't make your range bigger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so your range is partly just what God has given you. Your voice is what it is, and to some extent, and so you do need to figure out what voice has God given you. How high can you sing? How low can you sing? And don't try to push it too far in either direction. Because I just am not a bass. There's just no way I'm gonna sing bass with any confidence because I just don't have any low notes to sing. But generally speaking, I think for the average person, your range is bigger than you think, and you got to get comfortable with singing notes that feel higher than you maybe think they should. And the Psalter is designed so that you're not going to ever sing too much out of your range. Really, even the tunes that feel pretty high are mostly within most people. Most people can sing those notes. We're not really going into the stratosphere or anything. Okay, so that's just a little hobby horse of mine that I really want to encourage people that feel like they can't sing to go ahead and try it, and that's one factor. So today we're going to look a little bit at rhythm, at the notes on the page. As the presenter, if you're learning to present and lead the singing, you need to understand what the notes on the page mean, particularly in terms of how long you're supposed to sing them. So this will be something that some of you know like the back of your hand. This might be new to some of you, but we'll go over all of it here, these different rhythms or different lengths, durations for these notes. So on your sheet there, we start with a whole note. And a whole note has how many beats usually? Whole note has 4 beats. That's right. Yes, right? So you look on the page, that whole note is that circle, the oval without a line on it. Now, the beat is, if you've never heard of these things before, the beat is that steady pulse in the music, right? And if you don't know this already, one of the jobs of the presenter usually is to give people a sense of that beat. Okay, so the precenter's hand should generally, and we're going to get into waving later, so if you don't understand that, don't worry right now. But that steady beat is something that you're supposed to communicate to people, okay? So if we're in a time signature that has 4 beats in a measure, then you need to be doing these 4 beats so that people can follow along with the same kind of pulse, the same beat. So when I talk about beats, it's that pulse I'm talking about. That there should be that sense of a pulse in the music that you're singing. We don't usually think of psalm singing as having a pulse, like other music does sometimes. But it does have a pulse, right? It has a beat, and that's what we need to keep track of, and that's what the notes help us understand. So a whole note means that you sing that note, and the word that's on that note, you sing it for 4 whole beats, right? So whole notes is something we often see at the end of a tune, right? It's something you'll see at the very end of a tune where you're holding out that note at the end of a psalm tune, right? Then a half note looks like a little slanty oval with a line on it, though. It's got a hole in the middle. It's one of the white notes or the clear notes, but it does have a line on it this time. So whole note has no line. Half note has a line on it, and that is that you hold that note for 2 beats, right? So there are exceptions to all these rules. So we're just going to go in with what normally is the case. A quarter note then is that filled in note, then a black note with a with a line on it, and that's 1 beat, right? So if you're in a key signature with 4 beats in the measure, then you'll have 4 quarter notes, 1 for each beat. And so that's kind of the building block. I often like to think of the quarter note as kind of the basic note, and then you either get shorter or faster, faster or slower than the quarter note, right? And so the quarter note is 1 beat. Then you start to get into the flags and the extra bars and stuff, and that's an 8th note has either the 2 notes connected with that bar up top, right? Or it has a little flag on it. You can think of the little flag as that bar, it's just gotten disconnected from the note next to it, right? And that's the way I like to think about it. But an 8th note can look like either of those, and it's half a beat. So if your pulse is like this, then your eighth notes would be da 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 da, right? So a quarter note is just da 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 da, and then eighth notes is da 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 da, right? And then a 16th note, you add another little bar or another little flag, and you could just go on and on from there as far as you want. You can add as many little flags or as many little bars as you are, and every time it divides it in half again, because a 16th note is half as long as an 8th note. So if your pulse is like this, then it's da 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 da. Those are your 16th notes. So if you hate fractions, I'm sorry. These are fractions. That's just the way it's going to work. And so those are your most basic notes: the whole note, half note, quarter note, eighth note, and 16th note. And each one gets twice as fast as you go down the line there. Now, if that wasn't complicated enough, if this is all new to you, what does a dot do next to a note? Who can tell me what a dot does to a note? It adds half a beat. Well, half. So you said half a beat, which is almost right. It adds half of the value of the note. So is that confusing? So a dot on the note. So a half note, if you look at the examples there, a half note is how many beats? 2 beats, right? A half note is 2 beats. So a dotted half, you add half of the value of a half note, and you get 3 beats, right? So what about a dotted quarter? How many beats is a quarter note? 1.5. Right, a dotted quarter is 1.5 beats, right? So it was 1 beat for a quarter note, and you take half of the 1 beat, and you have 1.5 beats, right? And so you end up with a dotted quarter is 1.5 beats. Then a dotted eighth would be hard to even figure out how to. Right, it's 3/4 of a beat. Right? So I'm sorry. So this sounds really. This just sounds like math right now, and trust me, it starts to feel more natural when you see it on the page. For example, when I gave you the example of a dotted eighth note there, and the dotted eighth note almost always, especially in the Psalter, almost always has a 16th note after it. And the sound of that, if you have a bunch of those in a row, is da 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 da. Well, I'm almost doing. It's pretty close to that. So it's that sort of swung beat. It feels a little bit like a swung beat. It's not exactly the same, but it's da 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 da, right? And so you have a long, short, long, short, long, short. And so often that's what you'll see. The reason you'll see a dotted eighth or a dotted quarter is because it's followed by a shorter note. So instead of having 2 notes that are the same length, often you'll have a dotted one and then a shorter one right after it. Yeah, actually, I forgot to get a new marker when I started. Could you check I think it's in the kitchen in the. I'll try to demonstrate this on the board here in a minute. The good news is, essentially, once you've learned all those 5 undotted notes that I've given you, the rhythms, and then the idea of dotting them, you've got all the basic building blocks for rhythm. Okay? And the more you can learn this, the more this becomes second nature to you, the easier it's going to be to present, because you're going to get tunes that you're not as familiar with, and you're going to have to look at it quickly, and it really helps if you learn these notes and know how long things are supposed to go on, how long you're supposed to hold each note. Are there questions about the rhythm of notes on the page or the duration of notes at this point? A dotted eighth is 3/4 of a beat. So a dotted eighth is just as long as 3/16 notes. And this is where if if we can get a marker here in a minute, I'll try to show you. But the idea is, in the example of a dotted eighth that I have on the page there for you, the first note is worth 3 of this 1/16th note that follows it. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm not explaining this very well, but that's the idea. Is it adds half of the value of the note that you're looking at. I think it makes more sense what you're actually looking at on the page in a tune. It'll make more sense when we look at it. Right. Well, you don't usually, and that's the good news, is eventually you don't have to think about it too much, and you probably see them all the time while we're singing and don't think too much about it. Yeah, we often do. There are lots of psalms that have dotted eighths. Okay, so that's your introduction to rhythm, and I will encourage you to, however you best learn, to work on those things, work on learning those things. And memorizing them. I know growing up we had flashcards. I don't know if that's how you're wired or if that would help you out at all if you don't know these things. But just try to get those rhythms really set into your head that's what those notes mean. Thank you so much. That's great. Okay, so to answer the question about dotted eighth notes here, so what you'll often see is a dotted eighth followed by a 16th, right? So this little line up here makes it into a 16th note. And this dot makes it a dotted eighth note. And so what I'm saying here is that this is worth, if you have 4 16th notes, this one gets 3 of them. 1, 2, 3. And this one just gets 1 of them. So da, 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 da. Does that make sense? So this sort of borrows, whenever you see this a lot, or you'll see a dotted quarter followed by an eighth, because this is worth 3, so this gets, this is 3 times as long as this. So those are patterns you'll see a lot. You'll start to see how these things often go together. So it's just a little more on the...
There's a couple on the sight reading samples.
Yeah, so on the sight reading sample page, which we'll look at here in a moment, you see that there are some of those dotted eighths with a 16th in the sight reading sample. So you get a chance to try some of that out. Okay, the next thing you need to learn about the notes on the page, if you haven't learned to read sheet music at all before, or if you haven't thought through this stuff before, is the idea of the staff. And on a sheet of music, you usually have 5 lines, right? And the lines tell where the note is on the staff, up or down, tells you how high or low to sing, right? And that again, this is a basic to some of you, but for some of you it may be new. If the note is here, and then you go up to a note up here, then you need to sing a higher note when you get up to here, right? And so, and same if you go down. That's the idea behind the location on the staff. And each space and line, you actually go up space, line, like this. In most, in psalm singing, that's always the case. You go one note at a time, going space, line, going through the major scale. So da 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 da. Those notes are space, line. Does that make sense? And so the notes just work their way up and down. And in your Shawnee booklet, if you haven't pulled it over yet, open up to page 6. And if you haven't learned this before, but you've heard musicians talk about using letters and saying A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, that's because each of these spaces and lines on the staff has a letter that corresponds to it. And it's A through G, and then it starts over with A again. And so if you notice there on your On page 6 there of the Shawnee booklet, he gives you, near the bottom, there's the names of all of the notes. And if you are struggling to learn this, you could even print off an extra one of these and cut that out and stick it in the front of your psalm book. That if you ever really got in a bind and you couldn't remember what note something was and you needed to give a pitch for a psalm, that little guide that tells you this is what every single note is on the staff could be really helpful for you. But I would really encourage you to learn it if you haven't learned it before. Yes? All right, let's try that again. Hold on. Okay, so you said, sorry, I know you just said it well, and I didn't. Okay, so the first. Right, so E. Yep. Yep. Face, yes. Okay, so there are all kinds of great ways to remember these. So Olivia was just telling us E, G, what did you say again? E, G, B, D, F. These are the notes of the treble clef. In between are spaces for F, F, A, C, E, no more. So I've also heard this is the treble clef. We'll get to that here in a second.
Every good boy is fine.
But I did every good boy deserves fudge. That was what I learned growing up. Every good boy deserves fudge. Fudge, those are the lines, or every good boy does fine. And then face is really handy to learn those as well. So that's what the treble clef. I haven't gotten to that yet here, but you'll notice that in Psalms, there's a set of lines above and a set of lines below. Right? And we're going to talk about this more next week, I think. So I don't want to get into this too much. But you have to memorize two sets of letters, because this is how it is in the treble clef. Then you have the bass clef down here, and it is. I have to do this here real quick. So it's G, B, D, F, A, and then it's A, C, E, G. So good boys deserve fudge always is the way that I learned this one. And then I can't remember. All cows eat grass. That's right. All cows eat grass. All cars eat gas. Okay. So there are lots of great ways to try to learn these notes, right? And some of you have already done this if you studied piano or played in band or anything like that. I'm not going to go into depth in these, but if you're struggling to remember the notes, look up some of these things, little rhymes, little things that'll help you. But start trying to memorize those letters. Yes, go ahead.
I think one thing that helped me out, I struggled more with bass clef because I didn't play piano, but I learned a treble instrument, so I was very familiar with the treble clef for a long time.
Right.
And transitioning to bass was hard. If you're familiar with the treble clef and every good boy deserves fudge, that thing.
Yes.
If you just shift the lines and the spaces down a letter, or down or up, depending on how you look at it, like it's an easy way to remember the bass clef without having to try and learn a whole new set of mnemonics.
Yes, there you go. So if you have learned, especially if you've played an instrument that just plays in one clef, or if you're used to only singing in the soprano or the alto, sometimes you can just shift what you already know, shift it down a little bit into the bass clef, and that can help you learn those things. So I should note, again, we're not covering this week, so I'm trying not to throw too much to you at once, but the bass symbol is this sort of backward C-looking thing, and then the treble clef looks something like that. So that's how you tell the difference between the two clefs. But again, too much for today. We're not going to cover all that right now. Just the basic idea is you go up the staff to sing higher, down the staff to sing lower, and start trying to learn the notes. Start trying to learn the names of the notes, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G.
No, not playing while we're doing this.
There we go. If you could mute yourselves when you're not talking, that's helpful. But you're welcome to talk and ask questions. Okay, So no, that's no problem at all. We've had all kinds of Zoom adventures around here these days. So I point out on the sheet there that if you can learn this is the most basic level of presenting, okay? If you can learn the names of the notes, and you can look at the first note in the psalm, and you have a pitch pipe app on your phone, or a pitch app on your phone, and you can look at the page and say, this starts on a C, and play a C on your app, and hum that note, and start singing on that note. That's the bare minimum you need to be able to do to lead the singing. Okay? That's the bare minimum that some churches don't have. It was just somebody emailed me when I was talking about this course. Somebody emailed me and said, we just had to get somebody to come. We had to kind of hire in somebody from another church to come lead the singing because we didn't have anybody this week. And that's a situation churches find themselves in where we want to sing and we don't have anybody to get us started, right? And we have to, and that's a service that you can do. Even if you decide you're doing this course and you're not sure if you're going to be good at this and if you want to try it or not, learn the basics because there are real needs here that the church wants to sing and isn't sure where to start, right? And if you can learn the notes on the page and you can find a pitch on your app or on your smartphone or on your pitch pipe or whatever it is and hum that note so everybody can start on the same note and you know how to sing the melody of the song, that's the bare minimum for presenting. And you can do a great service. And we have a handful of presenters here that can sub in for each other, but there are churches that don't have people to present. And even if you don't particularly love it or enjoy it, this is a really valuable skill to work on. In our family, I love presenting with a passion. I love singing. I love everything to do with singing, and I will take any chance I get to present. And my wife is just as good at presenting and is a good musician, but she doesn't particularly enjoy presenting. And so in her case, if there's ever really a need and there's nobody else to do it, she'll do it, and she's happy to do it. I, on the other hand, will take the opportunity when I can get it. But even if you're more like Lisa and you say, you know what, this isn't my thing, I don't particularly enjoy it, it's still really good to learn something about it so you can help out and help the church sing together. Okay, in terms of practice, I would encourage you to pick a psalm in the week ahead. Pick a psalm that you don't know in the Psalter. Start flipping through until you find one that you're like, I don't think I know what this is. And then try to work out the rhythm and the tune of the first few notes. Okay? So find a psalm that you don't know and try to work out what the rhythm is. You can just try to clap the rhythm first. And then try to figure out what the notes are going up and down with the notes. And then one of the ways you can test yourself is go to psalter.org and go. I just realized that link might have been from before they redid psalter.org. So if the link is broken in the thing I sent out online, I'm sorry if that's not working right. But you can go to psalter.org and play the tune, and you can hear it, and you can hear if it sounds like what you thought it was going to sound like. So that's one thing that I want you to practice this week. Then also, when no one is around this week sometime, driving the car is a great opportunity for those of you who aren't driving yet. Your family just have to hear you. But find an opportunity when you're by yourself and try to see how high you can sing. And just get a feel for how high your voice can go and how low you can sing. And recognize that only the bottom part of that's going to feel normal. And that the higher you get, it may not feel right, but your voice can actually sing much higher than you maybe think. I would encourage you to try that this week and just make sure that nobody else can hear you when you're squeaking. Each week, I'm also just going to give you a couple of random tips for presenting that don't really fit into the curriculum, if you want to put it that way, just to help you pick up a few things along the way. The first is to remember that sound is slower than light. And this is something that plagues choir directors, has always plagued choir directors, that what you hear is actually behind reality, if you want to think about that. Think about it that way. So if you're singing in a choir and you're not watching the conductor and you're just basing it on what you hear, you're getting all this sound that travels all the way to the back of the room and then all the way back to you. By the time it gets to you, it's behind. But if you watch the conductor, then you stay together and you actually kind of have to sing a little bit ahead of where you think you should. And the same is true with the presenter. The same is true in a congregation, that if you aren't watching the presenter, and this is for all of us because we all, even if you're not presenting, if you're not watching the presenter, you're going to get behind. because what you hear is behind. That's why congregations just drag and slow down even more and more, because it gets slower, and then it sounds even slower than that, and we get slower and slower and slower. And so a way to combat that is to watch the presenter. And to be clear, if you are a presenter, to be clear in the presenting that you're doing, to not just be up there kind of doing little tiny motions, but to give it a full, good motion that people can see out of their peripheral vision, because they're trying to read things off a page at the same time, and if you do a good big motion they can see, then they can follow you.
Yeah.
Yes, Simeon.
Several times today I was like, oh, it's on passive and
Yes, Caden was leading very well today and keeping us moving, and I felt bad because I'm up there blasting away up front, and I looked over and I was half a beat behind him because I was not watching. I was just basing it on my ears. Yes. So, yes, it is a danger for all of us. The other thing is I would just suggest considering using your own Psalter all the time in worship. I don't do this myself. I have one of the pulpit ones. But especially those mini ones that they have now, they have a bunch of versions of the mini ones. They're really handy. You can just carry it with you. And that gives you an opportunity to start writing notes in your Psalter. It can be just like, this is a good one. I like this one. I hope I never have to lead this one, You can also eventually start, if you have struggles with key signatures and figuring that you can start writing in key signatures. You can record which ones are major and minor, things like that. So that can be a really helpful tool. If you just start carrying your little Psalter with you and bring it with you to worship, you can learn a lot that way.
I know there's several psalms where I'm like, I know this is minor and I don't know how it starts, so I'm just going to start on the key note and go from there, because obviously sometimes you want to try and pitch them so people know what they're singing, but it's like, I'm not sure how to pitch this, so I know this is a F or whatever, I know it's minor, so we're going to start like this.
That's right, and that comes back to what I was saying. If nothing else, if you can give people a note to start on, that's the most critical part of this whole thing. It's just you got to give people a place to start together. And if everything else flees from your head and you can't remember anything at all about what you're supposed to do, as long as you can give them a note to start, most RP congregations the train will get moving and we'll keep going. It'll be all right. So if nothing else, just being able to give people a starting pitch is the way to go. Okay, and we're gonna do a little bit of sight reading samples here for a couple minutes, and I'm not gonna post that stuff on YouTube. So before we do that, are there any questions from anybody on what we've covered so far today?